There is nothing more relaxing than a vegetable garden, until someone decides your hard work is their personal salad bar. My neighbor didn't just steal my food, he stole my peace of mind. But he forgot one thing. I don't just grow vegetables, I grow biological weapons disguised as snacks. By the time the dinner party was over, my neighbor was begging for mercy, and I was just getting started. If you've ever had an entitled neighbor, this one is for you. I take gardening seriously. For me, it's not just a hobby, it's a science. I've spent years perfecting my soil pH, installing a custom-built automated irrigation system, and mapping out the perfect companion planting grid. My backyard is a fortress of heirloom tomatoes, crisp cucumbers, and some of the rarest peppers in the world. Enter my neighbor, Gary. Gary moved in about a year ago and immediately became the neighborhood expert on everything. He's the guy who wears expensive outdoor gear just to get the mail and talks incessantly about his all-natural, organic, zero-carbon footprint lifestyle. The problem? Gary doesn't actually grow anything. He just likes the idea of it. It started small. I'd find a few sugar snap peas missing near the fence line. Then, a couple of my prize-winning Cherokee purple tomatoes vanished right when they reached peak ripeness. At first, I blamed the local wildlife. I thought maybe a particularly bold squirrel was having a feast. But squirrels don't use garden shears, and they definitely don't leave size 10 sneaker prints in the damp mulch. The turning point was my salsa garden bed. I had been babying a specific row of jalapenos and bell peppers for months. One Tuesday evening, I went out to harvest them for a dinner party, and the entire row had been stripped bare. Not a single pepper was left. I decided to invest in some high-definition security cameras, the kind with night vision and motion alerts. 2 nights later, at 11:30 p.m., my phone buzzed. I opened the app and watched in real time as Gary stepped over the low part of our shared fence. He had a literal wicker basket over his arm. He spent 20 minutes systematically picking my best produce, checking the ripeness of my melons, and even pulling up a few of my organic carrots. He was whistling. The sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. I didn't confront him immediately. I knew Gary. If I showed him the footage, he'd claim he was just borrowing them or that nature shouldn't be fenced in. I needed a lesson he wouldn't forget. I specialize in super hots. I have a dedicated bed for peppers that are essentially inedible to the average human. Ghost peppers, Trinidad scorpions, and the crown jewel, the Carolina Reaper. However, Gary knew what a Reaper looked like. It's small, red, and bumpy. It looks like a warning sign. To catch a thief, I needed a Trojan Horse. Through a seed exchange, I had acquired a rare hybrid, the Dragon's Breath Shishito. To the naked eye, these look identical to standard mild Japanese Shishito peppers, long, green, and slightly wrinkled. Typically, you blister them in a pan with some sea salt and eat them by the dozen. They're delicious and sweet. Except these weren't. These hybrids were bred to hit 1.5 million Scoville units. I planted a fresh row of these devil Shishitos right where Gary usually hopped the fence. I even put up a small hand-painted wooden sign that said, "Experimental crop, sweet frying peppers. Do not harvest until Saturday night party." I knew Gary's psychology. Telling him do not harvest was like a personal challenge, and telling him they were for a party made them high-value targets. Saturday night arrived. Gary was hosting a farm-to-table evening for his coworkers and his boss. From my porch, I could see his patio table set with expensive linens and candles. I watched through my kitchen window as Gary, thinking he was being stealthy, slipped over the fence one last time an hour before his guests arrived. He made a beeline for the sweet frying peppers. He filled his basket, looking smug, and retreated to his outdoor kitchen. About 30 minutes later, I heard the sound of a sizzling cast-iron skillet. The smell of charred peppers hit the air. It actually smelled delicious, which is the scary part. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the shadows of my porch. I heard Gary bragging to his boss. "Oh, these? Just some organic Shishitos I've been cultivating. You have to try them with the sea salt. The flavor profile is incredibly complex." I watched as Gary took the first bite to show off. He didn't just nibble it. He popped the entire charred pepper into his mouth and chewed confidently. The silence that followed was deafening. First, Gary's posture went stiff. Then, his face turned a shade of crimson I didn't know the human body could produce. His eyes started watering instantly, and he let out a sound that was half hiss, half sob. He tried to swallow, which was his second mistake. He lunged for his glass of white wine, but as any pepperhead knows, alcohol and water just spread the oil. He started gasping, "Hot! Too hot!" His guests were confused, then panicked as Gary literally fell off his chair and began crawling toward the garden hose. He spent the next 40 minutes with his head under the faucet, groaning in a way that sounded like a dying whale. The dinner party was over. His boss and co-workers made awkward excuses and left while Gary was still sobbing into a bowl of yogurt his wife had rushed out. The next morning, I was out in my garden humming a tune and misting my tomatoes, when Gary's wife, Janine, marched over to the fence. She was livid. "You poisoned him!" she screamed. "Gary's throat is blistered. He's in agony. We're calling the police for booby-trapping food." I didn't even look up from my plants. Booby-trapping. Janine, I have a sign right there that says, "Those are an experimental crop." They're high capsaicin hybrids for a hot sauce company I consult for. I was waiting until they reached peak toxicity to harvest them. I finally looked at her and smiled. The real question is, how did Gary get them? Because I didn't give them to him. And I certainly didn't invite him into my fenced-in backyard to take them. I pulled out my phone and showed her the clear 4K footage of Gary in his size 10 sneakers, wicker basket in hand, whistling as he stole my experimental peppers. If the police want to come over, I'd be happy to show them the footage of the repeated trespassing and theft of agricultural property. In this state, that's a felony, depending on the value of the rare hybrids. Janine turned white. She didn't say another word. She went inside, and 10 minutes later, I saw Gary through their window, looking miserable and holding an ice pack to his face. Update. It's been a month. Gary hasn't spoken a word to me. He doesn't even look in the direction of my yard. In fact, he hired a company to install an 8-foot privacy fence between our properties. He paid for the whole thing. My garden has never been more peaceful. My tomatoes are ripening, my peas are untouched, and I have a fridge full of hot sauce made from the very peppers that ended Gary's organic career. So, was I the asshole? Gary thinks so. But as far as I'm concerned, if you can't handle the heat, stay out of my kitchen and definitely stay out of my garden.